How you been? How was the rain down there?
Ooh, man. It finally stopped yesterday,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's crazy. My ex-wife went to Camp Mystic and her sisters, and she actually has a house on the Guadalupe, but she was spared because it's more her house is in New Braunfels, so Canyon Lake is between her, and so that created a buffer. It just drained into Canyon Lake, which was almost empty before this.
Yeah, well, Lake Travis, what, 65, 70% full now? When I checked it yesterday, it was 65%.
Holy cow!
It was down at 40. It's been at 40 for over a year.
Yeah.
Shit ton of water.
Yeah, I mean, it's so sad. I have two friends who had granddaughters at Mystic who did not make it,
Oh,
unfortunately. Yeah, very.
it's horrible. It's just sad. I mean, it's so unnecessary.
Yeah,
It's so unnecessary to not put in a freaking gauge and a siren.
right. Yeah, I don't know why, because Kerrville just doesn't. I'm sure they will now.
Well, I mean, if they have any money left after they get shit seed out of them,
Yeah,
if it doesn't bankrupt the town.
because other towns, I think like Comfort and other towns do have sirens.
Yeah, they have gauges and sirens, and they're not. And yeah, I mean, this is not. I mean, we're not talking. You have to take out a municipal bond to put one in.
Right.
This isn't like a bond referendum where we have to spend $200 million on a
Right.
river gauge and a siren.
Yeah, I mean and for folks who aren't from around here, we're in the hill country, both Lester and I. Lester, you live in Austin, I live in San Antonio, and so it's hilly, but it's limestone hills, so it's not soil. It's not like it's very arid, and the water just runs right off into canyons, which feed into the rivers, and you can get 20 feet on the Guadalupe within an hour and a half. I mean, they call it Flash Flood Alley for a reason.
Yeah, it's hard ground, and the water runs fast.
Right. Yep.
Well, I mean, this is a tragic time, and
Yeah, it's really too bad that it happened on the 4th of July. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been nearly as many people on that river.
exactly.
Well,
All right. Well, we can put that aside.
yeah. Yeah, let's move on. I thank you, Lester Jones, who is the chief economist for the National Beer Wholesalers Association. Welcome to BeerNet Radio, Lester. It's good to see you.
Good
And
to see you as well.
I wanted to have you on because you've been kind of a lone voice in having kind of a glass half full take on what's been going on in the beer and alcohol beverage industry lately, because it's been a tough year so far if you look at scans. So can you kind of go through your thesis of what you're seeing out there that perhaps others aren't?
Well, so I got to put my macroeconomist hat on versus my microeconomist hat on. I can put my micro hat on and talk about productivity, and I could talk about all the things that distributors and suppliers and retailers can do to make their individual firms better. But for this purpose, I gotta be a macroeconomist. I gotta start with the labor market. I gotta start with the demographics. I gotta start with international trade. I gotta start with policy and look at all those things from a macro perspective. So I'm going to say some things that don't necessarily fit in with the micro and what we know about getting beer into retail and merchandising and selling beer. We put that aside for another conversation. Let's think big picture stuff. So we knew during COVID that we were all locked down, and packaged beer in the off premise, you know, with a significantly reduced account base was really good for us, right? Because, everyone was home, people were basically inventorying beer in their homes for the industry, right? And it's not just beer, it's beer, wine, and spirits. It was toilet paper, it was everything. The American consumer suddenly became conscious of how often they shopped, when they shopped, where they shopped, blah, 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 blah.
That's a great way to put it. They inventoried the beer, and what's nice about that for the industry is that they paid for it first. And so, right.
It's like Amway. What's the best thing about Amway was getting people to put inventory in their basements that eventually they forgot about, right?
Right.
I don't know when you were growing up if you had an Amway family in your neighborhood.
Oh yeah, there's always one. There's always a
There's
cousin,
always one.
who's tried to sell you, get you in the cult.
Exactly. But you go into their basements and there would be home inventory, laundry detergents, toilet papers, yeah, you name it, it was all there. And that was a beautiful thing about COVID because the American consumer, through significant amount of economic stimulus from the administration, had excess cash to build home inventories. And that was beautiful until it wasn't. Because at some point, we stopped staying at home and we ventured out into the world. And when we did that, we stopped buying and shopping and consuming and doing the things that we do when we're mostly at home to becoming a lot more away from home. And I kind of picked up on it early in probably it was probably 2 years ago, early in 2023 or 2024, when we started seeing inventories everywhere starting to grow. It wasn't just beer, but it was alcohol beverages, and it was alcohol beverage distributors that saw, and that inventory to sales ratio that's been growing consistently since the end of COVID. But it was happening in many other things because most suppliers or manufacturers didn't really switch off that little switch. They said, okay, things have changed. We need to stop doing what we were doing and start doing something new. We just kept on doing what we're doing, hoping that everyone will stay at home and build inventories at home, and we can continue to along that merry way. But a couple of big picture things, really struck me. And we could talk about all of these in general, but most importantly was the labor market. The way the people that are actually working. And there was a point when inflation spiked and wages didn't keep up and people were falling behind. But it didn't take very long. It was probably less than 12 months that we actually got inflation back down to a reasonable level, 2.5%, 3%. But wages kept on growing at 4 and 5. So we actually continued to see real wage growth through half of 2023 and all of 2024 and into 2025. And currently, if you look at real wages, for the aggregate economy, for all the people, I'm not talking about your brother, I'm not talking about your sister, I'm not talking about, the random people you meet on the street that have complaints. I'm talking about the economy in general. Okay, all of us in one big happy ball. They, as a group, are experiencing real wage gains. Are people falling behind? Of course they fall behind. Are people way ahead of this curve? Yes, but on average, we are seeing real wage gains in 2024 and 2025. That's pretty significant because that is what we see as a tight labor market. We continue to have a tight labor market. So, that's really important to understand. And what happens when you have real wage gains, you feel good about yourself. You feel good about spending money. And when you feel good about spending money, you go out and do things. And I think in 2024, we saw that with the big concerts and the billions of dollars that people spent away from home, going to see all the great concerts and going to all the great venues. And that's why I've been using the term sociable premises, because I'm not talking on premise anymore. When I say sociable premises, guys, I'm talking about the on premise, the place that America goes to socialize. Right. And I
Taylor
remember
Swift
we're all about
concerts.
cocooning for a while. And I'm like, damn you, Harry, shut your mouth with your cocooning, because we are people and we like to socialize. Right. And
Right.
for us to be out in the sociable premises, I think is brilliant. And I think the data, the macroeconomic data that we have really support that theory that I have, because it's there.
Right.
So
And
you know, anything to say about that?
just to go back to the home inventory thing. It was worse for wine and spirits, right? Because it's not perishable and people can keep it in their pantry forever.
Yes, yes.
Luckily for beer, it is perishable. Although, like we pointed out on Monday's Beer Business Daily, most of the brewers have extended the shelf life magically by at least 30 to 45 days of their beer, which
Yeah.
has created an opportunity for them to ship more into distributors' warehouses. And like you've pointed out, with the BPI and everything, a lot of these wholesalers are bursting at the seams with beer for the last 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, oh, it's so frustrating because we as a country are really good at making stuff. For decades, we make more food than we can possibly eat. I mean, we can grow corn, we can soy, we can do all this stuff. We make beer, wine, spirits, everything in such volumes. It's insane. And manufacturers, well, like a Labrador running around looking for tracks, right? For treats on the floor. They just can't help themselves. That's what they
Right.
do.
Well,
Yeah.
because they got to run at capacity to
Yes.
for the to cover their fixed costs.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, you can't fault them for doing what they do best, but at some point you have too much. And that's kind of what we have right now. But we also have this economy, which was we also this is a simultaneous problem, right? This is people like to do one to one. They like to talk. Ozempic, beer down. Sober
Right.
carry, beer down. Wages
Yeah.
up, beer up. But that's not how it works. It's a simultaneous. It's multiple variables all working together. Some of them help you. Some of them bringing, compounding, interacting with them to bring them down. Others interacting to bring them up. So it's not that simple. What's driven me crazy is all the investor calls have been pointing fingers at the consumer. I mean, it's clearly the consumer is hurting. What is it? When there's one finger pointing at you, there's four pointing back or whatever the thing is, they're,
Yeah, the old Spider-Man meme.
yes. So there's a certain amount of restraint that some of these suppliers need to accept. And that you can't just, we can't, someone asked me about the industry the other day. And I was like, it's 100 miles wide and it's 100 miles deep. That's a big ocean, and some places are 100 miles wide and an inch deep, which is okay. You're an inch wide and 100 miles deep, but we are just boom, we just got this big thing. So a lot of these products, a lot of these brands are getting lost in this giant ocean of all these products. Drifting away from my macro thesis though on that, but let's go back to talk about the consumer who has had real wage gains, who is clearly, we spent $1 trillion, Harry. We spent $1 trillion away from home last year. The new defense budget is $1 trillion, and everyone's up in arms, and no pun intended. But we spent as much money on eating out and seeing concerts and and enjoying the sociable premises as we do on our military budget. That's an astounding fact. And I just checked the numbers just the other day because the retail sales numbers came out, and it's still growing. So
Right.
we haven't, as a country, yet we see gross domestic product. First quarter gross domestic product, personal consumptive expenditures were 0.3%. The big trade imbalances brought everything in, down to, I think we were -0.3 or a half a point, depending on how you want to slice the mustard. But for the most part, we're still pushing away. We're still pushing out into the economy. We haven't retracted yet, and we're going to get to Hispanics in hiding. We're going to get to all that stuff eventually when we start talking to demographics. But I'm still trying to keep us focused on the macro economy at this point because
So the economy is healthy, like you say, like it's
it's
wage
not
growth
healthy. It's resilient
resilient. Okay.
because we did have negative first quarter GDP growth. And
Right.
we're going to have negative second quarter GDP growth. That's just gross domestic product is just arithmetic. A plus B plus C plus D. And if consumption is slowing down, if investment is slowing down, if imports and exports are slowing down, if government spending is slowing down, you can't avoid a recession. All the components of the gross domestic product equation are slowing down. So there's no magic math that is going to make that number positive. It can't be. So we're going to have 2 quarters of consecutive declining GDP. The problem will be is that we still have growing real wages. We still have people spending more money out in the economy, just not as much as they did when we had all the pandemic spending. So maybe this is a little bit more returning to normal following the $6 trillion of economic stimulus that the economy is still kind of spend through, so to
Right.
speak, in
Right.
2025.
And and like you've pointed out, that there's just a massive shift to the off-premise during the pandemic, and then back to a normalization after the pandemic. And so maybe, is there a thesis that because people are spending more in the on-premise, we're just not going to
Social
sell as
premise.
much beer? We're just selling it at a higher
No.
price.
Yes. Last year in 2024, the beer distribution industry sold $70 billion worth of beer, right? And that was 3% more than they sold in 2023. So they physically sold more beer. And the on-premise was a big winner in that. But what's the sociable premises? It's hard for me to change the words that I used for so long. But the sociable on-premises, what they did though was also amazing because they didn't do what they did before COVID, right? Because, pre-COVID, 50 taps, give me everything you have. We don't care if we throw out a half a keg or whatever. Now they came back and they're very much more rationalized in what they're putting on tap. And that's why, I look at Bud, I look at Mick Ultra on tap, it's crushing it. It's got twice the share of any other brand in the sociable away from home on premise, because it's I think retailers recognizes a high turning, high velocity brand. It's got good name recognition. And people are buying it. And it's turning, it's churning away. So that's great for a retailer who used to keep 20 kegs on tap, and they got $100 tied up in every one of those and running around shaking them, trying to figure out what he's got to do. And screw it. Just give me a couple of these things to manage and I'll be okay. People are a little bit more accepting of not having that giant 25 tap bar to have to choose from.
It was unmanageable even before COVID, really. I
I
mean,
call it, yeah.
there's a lot of old keg beer out there. When you have more than 10 taps, there's going to be a few lines that are going to go stale on you. And even Fred Matt on the podcast a couple of weeks ago was like, I think we're getting to a right size number of taps out in the trade.
That's the market, and that's beautiful because you want the market to find equilibrium. You want buyers and sellers and consumers and suppliers and all. You want these people to find this. It doesn't happen right away, but let's have a little patience. Let the market find equilibrium, and we could have a good outcome for our sociable on-premise places where people like to gather and drink. And well, now we could put the public health thing on there. And I've said this many times in my talks: is like sociability is a prime factor in longevity. And the longevity research is clear. People that socialize live longer than people that don't socialize. So why in the hell isn't every member of the beer industry telling people to get out there, socialize, and live longer and have a beer? Like it should be flying from the airplanes and planted on every truck in the country. Being out and about with human beings is the way we should live our lives. I'm
No,
sorry to
I
all the introverts out there that disagree with me, but I think the majority of the population is actually extroverts and the minority are introverts.
right.
So,
Closet extroverts. I was thinking about this the other day, and like you said, everybody has, Ozempic, everybody's got ideas. And I was wondering, the price of an Uber has gone up so much. And I'm wondering if that dampens people going out. Maybe Elon's going to save us all with the robo-taxi, $4.20,
well,
unlimited rides.
maybe, but once again, and that's that whole price equation and what we choose to spend our money on. Yes, Ubers are a lot more expensive, but remember, they were never really priced at the market rate because they were just burning through their investors'
Right.
money
No,
before
yeah,
COVID, right?
we were
Every
all living
time you got that,
high off the private equity, money for a while there.
come on, it's not that Ubers are more expensive. Ubers are now finally priced at the market rate without the influences of free money, which remember pre-COVID, money was free. I mean, give me $100 million. I got a great idea. Of course, here's your money. Go do what you want to do. Burn through it. And if you made it, great. If you didn't, oh well, that, it didn't matter. Today, money has value. Thank God. I mean, I tell this all the time. The fact that there's a real interest rate and money has value and people suddenly think about it is a good thing. You want price to moderate people's behavior. Uh,
Sure.
that's what it does. And I think that's part of the volumetric problem that we have. Like I said, we're going out into we're eating out, we're dining out, we're going to concerts, we're away from home. We're not at home inventorying. We're away from home. And in that world, price is very moderating. I mean, things are expensive, so people just don't drink as much. You may just have one or two drinks instead of three or four drinks. Whereas at home, you brought a six pack home, you might have drank three or four of them and then left two behind, and or whatever. You've forgotten about the two. So, in the on-premise, when you're out with people and you're looking at prices on menus and you're constantly being reminded how much everything costs, right? Because when you're at home, you're not really paying attention to what everything costs. You walk out the door, the first thing you see is this stinking gas station with the price of gas on it, right? And then you go to your restaurant, you sit down, they want $16 for a hamburger and $8. All of a sudden price suddenly comes flying at you from all different directions, and you're suddenly thinking very differently than you did at home. So, that's important because that's the difference between these two worlds. And we look at the US beer industry, we look at on-premise and off-premise as an industry, but the reality is they're totally different worlds. They're Venus over here and Mars over there, right?
Yeah.
Here's the off-premise world on Mars. Here's Venus. That's the on-premise world. That's where all the fun is, but that's where all the really tight interaction with price and competing things that you can do with your money and all those other things are driving people's behavior. So we really need to think about these two worlds and how
They really are different. They're completely different industries. One's hospitality and one's retail. And I think you and I have both been in the industry for many, many years, and we really do focus a lot on the off-premise.
But that's where the data are.
Yeah, it's where the
That's
data are.
We get our little fix every 2 weeks.
Yeah,
On data, and that's it is still 80% of the industry. It is still very important. It's our bread and butter of our industry. It's so important. But it's you can't ignore the other. You can't ignore that other part because it's significant. And it's really important. And, even though White Claw and Truly came along and said, "Oh, look, we built a brand in the off-premise. The on-premise doesn't matter. See, you guys were so irrational about this on-premise. You don't build brands over here. We can do it with big giant displays and a Kroger or an HEB. Why do we need this on-premise?" And the reality is, you do.
yeah. It proved that you actually do if you want staying power.
And I think Mick Ultra is, I've been tracking Mick Ultra for almost 2 years now in the on-premise, and they're winning. They're kicking ass and taking names, and they're building a brand with consumers, with young consumers who probably never had a beer before.
Right.
And where I hang out. I hang out at the Crown and Anchor. It's a block from my house. It's a great place to sit down and have a beer, and it's a beer-only bar. And I see plenty of 21, 22, and probably not that age either, ordering Mick Ultra. They walk up there, but it's actually a fair price relative to the premium crafts that are there. So it's actually priced pretty well. So, but I watch them call up Mick Ultra, Mick Ultra, Mick Ultra. Those kids are gonna buy Mick Ultra when they if they have a party at home, they'll probably buy it because they like it now.
Yeah, and isn't that funny? Because when it started, it was kind of an old man golf beer.
Yes.
You didn't see many kids drinking it, but for from the AB's perspective, thank God they have it because it saved them after the Bud Light debacle. But
Right.
okay, so that's interesting. And why don't we
So
talk about demographics and where are you seeing also per caps? Because the data is, kind of I don't know. It's like they use surveys that haven't been updated in a while, and so there's projections out there.
A little frustrating. So I used to follow this. So remember, I look at the supply side. I look at the demand side. The demand side's really tough to do because you buy a 750 milliliter of gin, you take it home, you make two drinks, you put it away, right, and you forget about it. So I mean, we're going to talk about this because prior to the canned cocktail, per caps had the supply side per capita had a huge amount of spillage. I talked to who was I talking to? Brian Sedano from Beverage. Brian Sedano. He's an
Yeah, beverage marketing.
beverage market.
Yeah.
One of the things the soda industry discovered is that, like, I think a third of all their product actually got thrown away.
Wow.
Like, a
See,
third of
we
it
don't
got
think
thrown away.
about drain pour. Drain pour is a huge consumer of alcohol beverages.
Right. So when you think about the supply side, and I always talked about 2.5 gallons, and 2.5 gallons was very consistent for me. I see it as 2.4 in 2024. It'll probably be about 2.4 in 2025. It might be down a little bit, but part of it on the supply side is going to be the inventory problem. We kept on making, we're still making too much alcohol. I know that for a fact. I look, everywhere I look, the indications and the data suggest that no one's slowing down production. Walmart just came out with their own beer. Do they not know that there is a sea of beer and alcohol out there that they're competing against, even at their cheap price? You know, the sea of alcohol, it just gets lost in this 100-mile wide ocean and 100-mile deep, right? It just gets lost in this expanse of alcohol beverages. So um, that's important. But going back to my 2.5 gallons, 2.5 gallons was a pre-COVID number, and I think it had a lot of waste in it. I think craft brewers are a perfect example. When craft brewers started, they were 40% draft. The beautiful thing about a draft, if you've ever been to a brewery and watched someone fill a keg, they don't spill a drop. They put the thing on there, all the liquid goes in, the keg goes off to the retailer, and the retailer spills it all over the floor.
Right.
Right? Now you switch to putting your beer in a can. If you ever watch the canning line happen, there's beer all over the floor.
Right.
And the wastage is very much minimized on the consumer and the retailer side now. So even for the craft beer industry, which had this great bulk package called a keg, which delivered, let's say 90% of it was actually consumed, 10% of it was just spilled on the floor. Think about a stadium. God, how much beer is just spilled all over a stadium?
Well, I mean, yeah, because a lot of it's foaming, so they'll just let it run until it. Have you seen that before? They'll just turn the tap on, like walk away.
Let it roll. Right, and then you walk away and then you spill it and you go get another one. And now all of a sudden, here's a can. Here's a tall boy. And guess what? No one's spilling any beer anymore. Right? So there's the packaging in and of itself has created an efficient delivery system with a lot less spillage.
Interesting.
So now what was pre-COVID, which was, a 2.5 gallon number, which had a lot of inventory, had a lot of home inventory in it. It had a lot of spillage in it. It had a lot of, all of a sudden becomes a lot more efficient and rationalized in the post-COVID world. So now, and we can even apply this logic to the liquor industry, who once upon a time sold a 750 milliliter bottle of alcohol. And you, when you wanted to drink, went to say, oh, I want a gin and tonic. So you went and you bought a bottle of gin, and you went and bought a bottle of tonic. You went home, made yourself a gin and tonic. You put it on the cabinet, you forgot about it.
Right.
Right. And you're probably out $30 or $25. And you probably, the next time you wanted a gin and tonic, you probably stopped and bought a whole other bottle of gin,
right,
a whole other bottle of tonic, and oh, damn it, I already had one there.
Yeah,
right?
and your 18-year-old kid, meanwhile, is
or your 18-year-old. Exactly. But now all of a sudden, the geniuses in the liquor industry decide that they're going to go up against beer in a 12-ounce equivalency. And now all of a sudden, people like want a gin and tonic, they buy a 4-pack in a can. And they completely ignore the 750 milliliter bottle.
Right. And it's in their fridge where they could see it every day.
And they could see it every day, and they don't forget about it under the sink. So, it's so ironic, though, isn't it? Because the liquor industry so desperately fought for equivalency.
Yes.
Look at, we're a 12
they got it. Hey.
Oh, they got it. You got it. Sometimes we are all our own worst enemy.
You got it. Now you're dealing with unit economics that
yes.
they're very different.
Well, the game's all changed. The game's all changed for them. And, it's just crazy. But anyway, so that's the 2.5 gallons. And that's the supply number. So now I'm forced to go into the individual states now and look at the states that report. And when I look at the individual states that report, I see a lot more consistency and predictability in their per cat numbers. And once again, every state's different. Utah is nothing like Nevada. New Hampshire is nothing like California. They're all very, very different markets. So I'm st I still I'm going to stand by consumers are predictable, reliable consumers of alcohol beverage. I'm going to stick to that mantra. I told Nadine, I said, put it on my gravestone. You know, Big Lester died on the hill of predictable, stable consumer, right?
Right.
But I think that's important because a lot of the state data still shows some predictability.
Right.
Uh, there are some states that are big declines, Florida, for example, but now Florida becomes the demographic story. And that's where it gets interesting when you start. Now we're talking about demographics.
Because they're
Uh,
aging out.
well, they're aging out, they're aging in. It's this flat demographic blob of people, right? And I told you this before, when I sent you that chart where, 1980s, 1990s, and there was all these really nice demographic groups that were driving marketing and CPG forward for many, many years. But now suddenly there's this big blob of people. There's about as many people 21 as there are 65. And there's very little opportunity to really hit a demographic group and see some kind of big movement forward because we're all in it together. And I think 21-year-olds and 65-year-olds probably cross a lot and consume similar patterns a lot. I know that my Gen Zers, when we hang out with them, we have a lot in common.
Hmm. Yeah,
It's not that, the generations I think today are much more interlocked than they were in the 70s, the 80s, or the 90s, where there was always
I
this
agree. I totally agree with that, Lester. But the narrative out there is that it's not.
I
That
know.
but like I feel like I have so much in common with my Gen Z sons that much more than I do with my millennial employees. Like the millennials are kind of now they are a little different, okay? But
Well, we all have our fears and our desires and our wants and our needs, and that's and it is definitely predicated on our age and our station and our positions in life and where we're headed. But I think for decades, CPG and the general economy kind of fed off those generational uh, conflicts. They liked it.
right,
It gave them something to market on and to
right. The
differentiate
Pepsi
themselves.
generation,
Oh, yeah. Guess
you
what,
know.
guys? It ain't true anymore. We're all one big happy family. You may not accept that because you watch too much reality TV, but I think the reality TV side is that we're one big happy family. Kind of, we're all sharing all these goods and services together. Go to a concert of any pop star, and you're going to see the entire spectrum of generations there.
Yeah. No, I
You
mean
know, like,
my sons make fun of me because I'm a big Chapel Roan fan. They're like,
well, I
Dad,
would
how do you even know who Chapel Roan is? I'm like, are you kidding me? Pink Pony Club? It's a banger.
But exactly, when we were at ACL last fall, and I was standing there, and it was just the entire demographic spectrum.
Yeah.
It was the entire demographic spectrum there, and no one was drinking beer because it was 110 degrees and dry, and everyone had liquid death in their hand. I bet you if it was a 9-degree pleasant breezy day, everyone would have had a beer in their hand. But
Right.
my point being is that, demographically, we don't have these generations that we can fight knock off of each other, right? And that's what we were so used to for decades. So I think if you're a marketing guy and you're thinking about what's in it for beer. I mean, you got to think of beer as inclusive. You got to think of beer as sociable. Beer's got to have all these attributes that take it a step beyond, just the alcohol in the can.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and demographics are important. I mean,
And what do the demographics look like? I mean, isn't Gen Z a pretty big generation as far as
yeah,
size?
yeah, yeah. I mean, we're talking, 60 million, 50 million, 55. I mean, like, I think it depends on how you put them in, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but think of it. I look at it as kind of like 60 million baby boomers, 60 million Gen Zers. You got some millennials and some Xers in there at about 50 million. gets you to 235 million, legal drinking age consumers. But that's still a that's still pretty close, I would say.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of crossover in that. And like I said, there's the generational warfare, is people are getting tired of it, I think.
Yeah.
There were it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. It's funny. It was funny for a while, but
Yeah,
like,
it was funny, haha. Yeah.
ha ha ha. But yeah, bashing millennials, like I just did it and it's not even that funny anymore. But yeah, I get it.
Yeah, beer industry should probably take a lesson from that. Is that, let's start bringing these generation guys. Once again, I think there's $50 trillion worth of wealth in the 65 and older category. You better start making peace with your generations if you want to stay in mom and dad's will or grandpa and grandma's
Right.
will, right?
Especially when
You
they have
better,
all the money.
yeah, because they got all the wealth, guys.
Yeah,
So,
it is
you know,
true.
so it might be time for the Gen Zers and the millennials to start, to get off the making fun of the Xers and the boomers, and
Nobody makes fun of Xers because they forget that we exist.
yeah, this is true.
Just this
All
forgotten
right.
generation.
So let's keep going on. So
Yeah.
we touched on demographics a little bit. I do,
Yeah.
demographics are destiny. There's no doubt about that. And every market and every state that I look at has a unique demographic profile, and it really, they rely, and those markets rely on different things. When I look at, for example, we do have a problem with Hispanics in hiding, and that's,
I read this morning that LA is like a ghost town right now.
right, and I use the remittances, which are the monies that the Mexican workers send back to their families in Mexico, and you track it through the remittance system. Uh, it's down over 10%. And that's
Mm,
after 15 years of year-over-year consistent growth as our economy was growing, as we were spending money, as we were going out and enjoying hospitality and going out into all those and going out in the economy, to see that suddenly fall off, by 10%. I mean, it's tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars
that's
that
pretty significant. Yeah.
it's a significant number, and that's my bellwether for what's the impact of Hispanics in hiding. And yes, the beer industry's taking it on the chin.
Yeah.
Because Hispanics over-index in beer consumption relative to wine and spirits, blah blah blah. We're taking a disproportionate hit to it. But once again, remember when I said earlier on, this is a simultaneous equation. It's a multivariable, many different variables impacting our industry simultaneously. Real wages propelling us out into the on-premise, the sociable premise, getting us out there. We're drinking less, but spending more, blah, 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 blah. But at the same time, you have these demographic impacts, you have the Hispanic impacts, you have the tariff impacts, you have all these other things that are kind of hurting the industry while we have something lifting us up. I mean, imagine what would happen if we only had the positive sides of the industry, you know,
Right.
driving us forward, how great that would be.
To what extent do you think that beer taking outsized pricing above CPI has had an effect on demand, if any? If any?
So once again, and these are indices, right? So it depends on where you start, right?
Right.
And how you measure it. I think for 2024 and 2025, beer has been slightly below CPI.
Yes, that's what I've seen. Yeah.
So, I think being close to CPI is just a really good story for the beer industry. We want retailers to be able to afford to keep their lights on. They need to have some pricing power so that, and consumers, 'cause the volumes are down, but the dollars are up. That's not happening in 2025, that's for sure. But for decades, we had that formula of keeping up with CPI. I think now we're seeing it fall away, which is going to be a problem.
Yeah. I mean,
How
the
we
deals
address
out
that.
there for the 4th of July were now given their rebates, so not all of them are redeemed.
Right.
But getting $20 off on a case of beer it's pretty much free at that point. I mean,
Yeah.
unbelievable. We haven't seen it in a long time, but
But once again, we're really good at making stuff, Harry.
right.
We
And
are
when you have a lot
good,
of stuff,
and we have a lot of
when you
stuff.
have this stuff, you got to get it out the door any way you can. You got
Yes. You can't fight the laws of econ. I mean, you can fight the laws of economics. I think plenty of people, we have plenty of commentary on that. But at some point, the laws of economics catch up with you.
yeah.
And uh, and I think that's kind of what's happening in 2025 for us is that we're drinking less because we're spending more money seeing Chapel Rowan and Beyonce and Taylor Swift. And you see Pearl Jam, you see Mac left Pearl Jam. That was sad.
No, I didn't. I haven't.
The drummer for Pearl Jam, Mac,
Oh, he left.
retired.
They say that there is a like a Taylor Swift effect that she sucked so much in her Eras tour out of the economy because the tickets were like $1,000 a piece, and it sucked all the money so that young women weren't spending on anything else.
Right, they're spending all their money
Yeah,
on that.
like makeup and all these other categories were down. Anyway, who knows if
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
true? But
Anyway, but when you're out, like I said, there's this dynamic, and we concentrate on selling beer in the off premise where that you're interacting with your groceries and the prices there. But the minute you get away from home, what you interact with and what you have to spend your money on and your share of wallet becomes a totally different equation. And you could, Dave and Bump and those guys at Nielsen and IRI and at Bump Williams and at Three Tier, they're really good at analyzing how that grocery and that convenience world operates and how you interact with all that. Once you get out there in the big world, you know, how you spend that money is so different. It's Mars versus Venus, guys. You got to treat those two planets differently.
right.
Where were we? We
Uh,
were talking about demographics. Talked about the labor market. We talked about demographics. We talked about labor and Hispanics in hiding. We do, from a macroeconomic trend, we do kind of need to touch on, kind of what I'm talking about now is kind of this current state of affairs. What's happening today. I do feel that, this whole, hospitality and leisure industry is at a big risk. I think, the tourism is down probably 20%. That's a lot of what I call borrowed consumption. So go back to my 2.5 gallons that I talked about on the supply side. That includes the borrowed consumption, the consumers we bring in from outside our markets. Florida is a perfect example in terms of Canadians coming in and Europeans coming in, and they're all coming to visit. They all bring their boatloads of euros and pounds and Canadian, what are they called, loonies?
loonies, yeah.
And they all bring their loonies down here to spend on beer.
And they
But
Canadians can drink.
they can drink,
They
what? And they're not here. You know,
no, no,
they're,
geez,
oh, geez, no, they're not
no.
here. They're staying home.
Stay at home.
Uh,
They're too bad too. You're right. That's a big and that because you mentioned at the beginning that Florida's per caps were down, and
yeah.
I said, are they aging out? And you're like, no, there's other issues, and there you go. You're
There's
not
other issues
you're
there.
not getting that flood of Germans that come in every summer.
Yeah, but it's funny because I was looking at the traveler statistics and Icelandic people, like I did the math on it. It was like one out of every three people from Iceland has come to Florida. It's insane. It's like, could you
I mean,
imagine? Like,
if you lived in Iceland, wouldn't you want to go to Florida too?
when I was looking at the numbers, and I'm like, whoa, there's only like
Wow,
300,000 people there, and they had 100,000 people come through. That's
wow.
crazy. But anyway, there's a lot of wealth out there in the world, that's for sure. And people like to travel, and I
And
think
people
that
drink more when they travel, because they're on
yes,
vacation.
because they're on vacation.
Right.
Yes. And looking forward, and I'm looking at that what I would call the leisure and hospitality uh, downturn, which I think we're in right now because you could just look at the traveler numbers and you could look at some of the big traveler markets and the data are there. It's clear it's happening. So that borrowed consumer that we were so used to having before we started this anti-immigration uh, agenda is certainly hurting our industry. There's no doubt about it. And I think going back to the labor market, if you look at what's been growing in terms of employment, it's been two things: leisure and hospitality, and health and education services and local government. Those are out of all the industries in the United States, the big contributors to to employment growth have been those three categories. And right now I see them at risk.
Mm.
So while we've been spending a lot of money away from home and the trillion dollars we've spent seems to be holding on, there is some resiliency there to it. I think, losing that borrowed consumption from the rest of the world is a problem. And then you got to turn to the dollar, right? The dollar is the lowest, is down. I think I don't even know if it's down, if it's down probably around 10-12% now. So
Yeah,
every location.
it's not a good time to travel to Europe right now.
Exactly. So once again, multivariables, right? So less people coming in, more expensive to go out. What's that net effect doing for us? And does that force people to stay at home? And if they're staying at home and they have real wage gains, of course they're going to go out in the leisure or hospitality industries and be in their own markets. So this might 2025, 2026 may be the year of being a tourist in your own town. That could be, I could see that a headline next, this time next year, we're going to be reading about how being a tourist in your own town is the new chic thing to do on social media, right?
Yeah.
Discover all the things you never saw. You discover all the hidden secrets in your town that you never knew were there.
Staycation, baby.
The staycation.
You know
But
what? I've been doing that in San Antonio on my one wheel. I'll throw my one wheel in my trunk and go like on the west side and ride around. I've explored more areas of this town that I never knew existed. There's a place in the west side of San Antonio that rents tires. But you didn't know that. They rent tires.
you rent tires?
Yeah, I don't know why you would want to rent a tire, but you can get
Well,
that if you need it.
I could see renting some off-road tires. I got a nice four-wheel drive vehicle that I bought it and it still has the road tires on it. And I'm like, well, I can't take these off-road because they'll just get destroyed. So I could go rent some good mountain
Okay. Well,
tires.
I can hook you up. There's also a candy store on every other block. Dulces,
Oh, really?
Yeah, a lot of sweets on the west side.
A lot of
Anyway,
sweet-
we're getting off topic, but yeah,
You are.
that
So where were we? So once again, so I'm going to go back to our beer market is a multivariable problem. It is demographics, it's economics, it's policy, it's suppliers and retailers and distributors all trying to interact to find what's that good equilibrium of inventory to meet those demands. And then on top of it is all this other stuff. So part of what drives me crazy is, you open up the newspaper and there's another story about Sober Curious and how Sober Curious is driving volumes down. And all I want to do is bang my head against the wall. Or, it's inflation is hurting consumers' pocketbooks, therefore they're not buying beer. None of these things you can put in context alone. And there's always a but or an and in addition to that, very few people choose to cover, and that's part of what I was saying to both Comey and Nadine in their talks is like, listen, guys, you're a bunch of Wall Street analysts. Your job is to understand the macro influences that are driving these individual companies forward. And for someone to get on for someone to stand up during an investor call and say, well, inflation has hurt our consumers' pocketbooks. We're down. Hopefully, the Federal Reserve will take care of inflation. Thank you for attending. I'll see you next quarter. And I'm like, no, wait a sec. That's such an incomplete story. I know you're smarter than that. And I know your people that work for you understand the industry better than that. So why would you even put that out there? I think that's the frustrating part of looking at the industry in such a macro global viewpoint.
right. No, I mean we all want the silver bullet, and I think what you've kind of explained throughout this call, there's a lot of factors that are going into this, a lot of variables, and they all contribute one way or the other. I don't know why the New York Times has a hard on for alcohol, but I mean, just this weekend, there's another, oh, guess what? If you're over 50, you better not drink or you're going to die. It's like,
It's almost becoming a public disservice because if you look at, like I said earlier on, if you look at the longevity research, if you go to the Buck Institute, if you look at the Longevity Valley, where all the entrepreneurs and all the tech guys are getting together trying to figure out how to make people live longer and what things to have about, it always comes back to sociability. And alcohol has always been front and center of the sociability. Now, I'm okay with you moving it aside. I don't think if you don't need a drink to socialize, you don't need to have one. But if it helps make the occasion happier and more jolly, by all means, have a drink. But to demonize it the way they're doing in such, it's not even an analytical way. I mean, they don't even do the econometrics, the analytics are just junk, are just not, they're not well
well,
suited.
I've also noticed that a lot of times they'll just use their own personal anecdotal. I've
Yes.
been to 3 dinner parties and nobody was drinking. I'm like, that you're not representative of the
Right.
country.
No,
You
no,
kind
no,
of
no.
run in
It's
an elite circle.
yeah, and every story, yeah, and you're right. And every alcohol story seems to be written by one AI agent. I think there's just one AI agent that the WHO and that they put out there, and they just say,
Yeah,
"Do you want a story to run? Just throw something." Susie and Jane went to a party, and then give me an anti-alcohol story. And it starts, well, Susie had too much to drink and she realized that was bad for her. And then she went home and told her friend. And then the AI, and then they just put the New York Times on it. And there's one Skynet creating all these stories.
the I wouldn't put it past the WHO to do something like that.
Exactly.
I mean, it's
Uh,
almost not even a conspiracy theory. I could believe that.
I know. When you read them, they all read the exact same way. They all start with a personal anecdote that turns into, something that's more localized, and then they quickly jump to a big global conclusion. And they follow the exact same cookie cutter approach, and then they just gloss over so much of what's important about moderate, healthy alcohol consumption. And then they just ignore all the other things, and like
Yeah,
I said at NCSL the other day, I was like, guys, who lives around alcohol and doesn't have a lot of cancer? Are the monks, the Belgian monks who drink alcohol every day, live very healthy lives, or the monks in Tuscany that brew that are vintners and have these great monasteries that are wineries. They live long, happy lives. You have these perfect natural experiments. These are all natural experiments, right? You could go to Belgium and you could find 500 monks and you could show them that they have alcohol every day and not one of them died of cancer.
right.
Now,
Yeah,
you could go down to Tuscany, find 600, Italian monks or nuns for that matter. I don't know if they're nuns or monks that, you know, are the vintners down there, but whatever. And prove to me that, these people have a higher rate of cancers than the people that are around. It's a perfect natural experiment. It's right
right.
there in front of you. Do it. Prove to me, and then show us that you have a natural experiment. But what the data that they're presenting are just meta-analysis. They go find 1,000 flawed studies. They try to equalize them all away, and then they say, "Oh, look, we have 1,000 studies, and they show this." Well, they were flawed design studies to start with. Just because you put them all together and did some statistical magic to them doesn't make the basic kind of metrics that underline the study design. It doesn't negate the fact that that study was flawed to begin with, and it probably was never even replicated. Uh,
Right.
it's
No, I
very
mean, even
frustrating.
I'm not a statistician, but even when I was back when the WHO was doing all that business, I was like, yeah, the meta analysis seems you're it seems a little flawed the way you're doing this. But I know from personal experience that journalists are lazy, being one myself.
Well, yeah,
So
and it's okay, but when you're trying to move public health in a direction, I think doing it with bad data and 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 not necessarily sound methodologies is a disservice to the population. a
Yeah,
huge disservice to the population, especially when we know sociability and human interaction are so important to living a long, healthy life.
right.
And if alcohol could help people do that, that social lubricant to get people to stay out, to be out, to engage with people, uh, and I'm not saying it's a requirement. I don't think alcohol is a requirement to sociability. I'm just saying it's a complement to sociability, and to cut the complement out is a disservice to the opportunity for people to live happy, long lives.
Agreed. Agreed. Well, Lester, thank
What
you.
else?
We
Oh,
need to.
I have a couple of plugs, Harry. You
Oh,
can't
yes.
come.
Yeah. Let's get your plugs
Well,
out.
number one, we have on, I've talked a lot about the fintech data in the past. July 17th at 2 p.m., we're going to have a fintech NBWA 6-month industry update. So that's going to be important because I'm going to expand on all of this away from home sociable premise data that we have. Because remember, fintech is on and off premise combined.
Yes, that's
Uh,
that for those at home listening. Fintech, it tracks wholesaler data, so you get account level data. So it's not scan data, it's not retail data. It's what's actually going out to retailers. So you get both perspectives.
Yes, and it's the only data it's the only data set we have that is both on and off premise, and it allows you to just say, okay, here's Venus, here's Mars, here's why Mars is doing well, here's how Venus is not, and that's what we're going to be doing. Now that I have a theme, I'm going to have I'm already working on my title slide as we speak. Uh, so that's good. Second of all, we do, if you haven't paid attention to the beer first tools that we have at NBWA, yes, volumes are down. We're down, what, 3, 4, 5%. Who knows what the volumes are because TTB isn't keeping up on reporting. I think Andrew Heritage is doing a great job at his new role as a Beer Institute economist doing the estimates, but we still haven't got a lot of good data out of the TTB in terms of what the
Yeah,
actual.
and it gets revised. It seems like a lot.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, it's like GDP numbers. We're gonna have 4 GDP revisions. I can guarantee you each one's going to get worse, but the further you get away from it, the less relevant it is. So, but
Right.
anyway, don't get me started on that. So, but going back to Beer First, I think Beer First is it's this program we have at NBWA. We're gonna be doing a lot with it in 2025 because we need to. We need to get beer out front. We need to get people talking about beer first, and then talking about their brand second. We're with some great partners with Tamaron and Sully's on there, and Tom Fox is on there. A lot of people are helping us out and contributing and trying to move this industry forward. That's going to be super exciting. And you know, like I said, not, sometimes we're our own worst enemies, and not doing anything is probably the worst thing we can do. Doing anything is better than doing nothing. So people may poo-poo beer first and say, it's not really what we need or what we want. It's something, and we're moving the ball forward. And I think that's what we need to concentrate on here. And third, innovation showcase. So Dave Crispin through the Beer Industry Electronic Commerce Coalition, BIECC,
Mhm.
we're doing an innovation showcase in October in Las Vegas with our convention. Is going to be a ton of fun. It's going to be an afternoon of all of our industry associate members kind of presenting what they are doing to bring tech, big data, AI to distributors and to the industry to make us more efficient. We saw this. We did a survey in the spring, and we asked our members what they were going to be investing in 2025, and basically tech and AI and data came to the top. You know, uh,
Interesting. I will be
even
definitely checking that out. I'm because I'm a nerd that way.
Yeah, yeah, it's going to be fun. Yeah, we're limited. We have a little time slots for everyone. We were like, well, how are we going to keep everyone on time? We got a gong. We're going to have a gong, guys.
Good luck with that.
Boom,
I
get
like
off the stage. It's going to be it's something that I think is going to be just an innovation showcase for everyone to sit down and just see what it means to be a tech-oriented beer distributor, how to use these things. Because volumes are down. And we know that. And keeping your employees going, keeping your trucks going, keeping your inventory float, keeping your bankers happy is we're not going to do it by selling more cases in 2025, guys. It's just not going to happen. And you may have all the chips pushed on D9 to get you through it, but that's a pretty risky proposition. So you better be thinking about how to make your operations more efficient, your analytics better, and your insights, and using all the data and all the tools that are out there in our industry to make you do better. So it's going to be a super exciting showcase for us, and it's going to be the Sunday. It's going to start Sunday afternoon, so you got to come early.
Right. Come early.
Come,
Exactly.
enjoy, send in, and guys, you can send your tech guy. Come in Sunday, hang out Monday, and get him out of town before he spends all his money at the casino. You can send people early to participate in that showcase as well. So don't think they have to stay the whole time if they got important work to do back in the market.
Right.
Where
Absolutely.
are we on time? How'd we do?
We're good. We're right at the hour mark, and that's
Wow.
perfect. And Lester, I'd like to start having you on twice a year at least, just to get
All
your
right.
kind of updates and because it's important to get a more holistic view. As I listen. I've been guilty of it more than anybody. My focus on the off premise, because, like you said, that's where the data is, and it's
Yeah.
when you have a daily publication, you kind of you go where the data is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. No, you,
So
you you have to follow the data, and you
the
have to
data are. I'm
the
sorry,
data
you're
are.
the only other person I know that knows that data is a plural word, and I get whenever I say the data are in the newsletter, I get people email, "Hey, you have a typo here," and I'm like, actually,
Actually, I do. People still asking for free T-shirts?
yeah, no, we quit that program because
You ran out of T-shirts.
yeah, it was too expensive. It was I was going broke.
That's cool.
Yeah, I caught a typo in Beer Business Daily, and all I got was this lousy T-shirt.
Yep, it was brilliant. No,
So
brilliant T-shirt. Yeah, no, we're gonna have a ton of fun. It's gonna be an interesting year. I mean, this big beautiful bill. I mean, it's taken a sledgehammer to a lot of things. And I call it in economics, we have the broken window fallacy, which is, I want to stimulate economic activity, so I'm just going to go through town and break every window. And then
right,
I got bring in the contractors, bring in the glass manufacturer, bring
yeah,
everyone in and start building. And at the end, I look around, God, look how beautiful windows I have. Things are good. And a little bit what's happened with this big beautiful bill is a little bit of the broken window. We're going to smash up a bunch of things and kind of rebuild them. So how all these tax things play out, how the all these things play out is going to impact the economy in negative ways and in positive and negative ways. I wish I knew what the net effect would be. I just couldn't tell you what the net effect. I mean, I'm reading all the pundits and all the economists all have various opinions about what the total net effect will be, and I think it's pretty hard to tell at
yeah.
this.
It's yeah. Reading those tea leaves is not enviable.
Yeah.
Well,
All right.
all right, Lester. Well, listen, have a good week, and I will see you, if not before, I'll definitely just see you at the NBWA convention in Las Vegas in the fall.
Yep. Yep. And hopefully we'll see you on the 17th for our 6-month industry update as well.
Oh yeah, I'll be there. All right, man.
Yeah.
Take care.
All right, guys.